Open your eyes. Open your eyes. Wake up, Link.
It's been barely over a year since the Nintendo Switch released. I was one of the first people in line before its midnight release to get my very own Nintendo Switch and a copy of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I was so excited for this console and this game. The console itself has been just as amazing as I expected it to be. The game, not so much. I'll say it right off the bat. Breath of the Wild is not a bad game. It's a good game, but it's also not a great game. It's not my game of the year of 2017, that goes to Mario Odyssey, and I think that in many regards, Breath of the Wild is simply overhyped. With that being said, my first experiences with the game was amazing. That night when I got my Switch, I put in Breath of the Wild, and those first couple of minutes are breathtakingly beautiful. Very few games have given me goosebumps at the beginning like Breath of the Wild. Maybe Ori and the Blind Forest is the only other one that I can really think of right now. The first few hours of my Breath of the Wild experience was everything I wanted and more. An open world Zelda game, new items, I can jump, I can climb. I remember watching the 9 hours of gameplay at E3 the summer before and taking notes on every little thing that was in the game because it was such a deviation from the Zelda formula and it looked so amazing. And for the first few hours of the game, it was amazing. It was one of my favorite video game experiences. But, and there's always a but, the rest of the game isn't as wonderful for me. In fact, it's not even great, and in many ways, I'd even go as far as to say that Breath of the Wild can be kind of mediocre. Since I started the game, I've put in roughly 75 hours of game time. That's the amount of time that it took me to beat the main story and explore a lot. In fact, most of that time was me exploring, playing with the mechanics, being in the overworld. I did just enough shrines to get the Master Sword and I completed the 4 main dungeons before beating Ganon, but after I beat the game, I tried to go back and play more of it. I kept thinking, do I really want to play this game anymore? And the answer for me is no. I got all I could out of it. There didn't feel like there was anything left for me. See, here's the thing. Breath of the Wild is an open world game with very little to do in it. Or I should say very little interesting things to do in it. The game does something weird where it's an open world but there's no true push to explore. I say that, but I mean after you've already explored a lot of its main mechanics and you've gotten a few hours of exploration in, there's just not really a push to explore anymore. You know what you're gonna find. It's either one of the 4 divine beasts, a side quest, a Korok Seed, a giant enemy, or a shrine. And I'm going to talk about each of these main 5 things that you can find in this open world and why I don't believe it's really that great. For starters, the 4 main dungeons, or divine beasts, are tedious and boring. The blight fights within them are all pretty easy except for Thunder Blight, which was a big pain in the dick. And the final boss, while it was epic, it was done so quickly. It was easy. The next thing is the side quests. The side quests are available, but unlike past Zelda games, they don't really give you anything useful. Typically in a Zelda game, you finish a side quest, you get a heart container, or a bottle, or an item, something of substance in any other Zelda game. But in Breath of the Wild, you'll usually just get rupees. Which brings me to my next point. Adding an economy in a Zelda game is boring and not rewarding. You can sell shit to get money. Whoop-de-freaking-do. In past Zelda games, rupees came in 2 forms. You either roll around and find them as they slowly accumulate, or you find chests with them. They were also useful for at least most of the game. In Breath of the Wild, you technically don't need rupees at all to succeed. And I know what you're thinking, Zach, the way they did rupees in Breath of the Wild was genius. And at first, I thought so too, but then I just realized that in past Zelda games, I spent rupees on items that I needed. In Breath of the Wild, I find any items that I needed. And I'll get to items soon enough, but the only thing I ever spent money on is arrows. I'm so sick and tired of buying arrows, it's not even funny. The next thing you'll find in this open world are Korok Seeds. The Korok Seeds are almost so pointless that I only collected about 20 or so of them, and that was just by me noticing a few patterns, and it would have been a bigger waste of time if I had not collected them. If you're a completionist, good luck, because there's 900 of them. 900 of them. 900 of them. When you turn them in, you do increase your available inventory slots, but honestly, I beat the game without turning in a single one of them, and I very rarely found myself needing extra slots. Moving on to the next thing you'll find in the open world. There are about 4 large enemies in this game scattered throughout the land of Hyrule, and for the most part, they're about a battle of attrition or having the one-hit arrows. The Lynels suck the hardest. I've killed one of them, and because of how optional they are, I didn't feel quite as rewarded as, let's say, a boss in Dark Souls or Shadow of the Colossus. Just because a large boss-like enemy was difficult doesn't mean that it was necessarily fun to fight. The next enemy is the Guardians, which are practically a waste of time if you want to fight them early on. These are what the one-hit arrows are created for. There's only one really main area that you're going to want to fight them in, and that's when you're heading into Hyrule Castle. The next 2 large enemies are the Talus, which is in the form of a stone, lava, or ice. These are pretty difficult to kill, but not as hard as the other 2 enemies were. And the last large enemy is the Hinox, which is pretty cool, honestly, but I only found myself fighting one of these once. The problem with these enemies is that none of them are required to fight, which means they're all incredibly difficult with very little reward. You could say that the Guardians have Guardian items, which allow you to craft better weapons and armor, and that's the only reason why I would ever fight them. But again, you can just buy one-hit arrows. While we're talking about one-hit arrows, let's talk about weapons. When it comes to weapons, the constant change of weapons suck. There's this durability system that looks like they took it directly out of Dark Souls, except guess what? Dark Souls did it so much better. In Dark Souls, you can use a weapon until it breaks, but you can also repair that weapon before it breaks. In Breath of the Wild, you just lose that weapon. It's gone. Bye. And with this durability system, it's like I'm not even playing a Zelda game. In fact, where are all the unique items? Sure, you've got the Sheikah Slate. That's it. A few core mechanics that you can use in the world. Meanwhile, past games have had upwards of 20 unique items that allow you to find hidden secrets and solve puzzles. Why couldn't we use that arsenal of items throughout Breath of the Wild? If the next Zelda game is an open world game, I hope that we get the traditional Zelda items back. It'd be awesome to hookshot into a crevice in a mountain to get a heart piece, or bring back the spinner from Twilight Princess. When it comes to its open world, Breath of the Wild's last main attractions are its shrines. 120 individual puzzle-filled experiences all over the world of Hyrule. What's bad about these shrines is that they're just puzzles with no real reward for completing them, except for getting more hearts, more stamina, and sometimes a weapon. This is just gonna break anyways. In previous games, you get puzzles throughout well-designed dungeons with enemies and obstacles everywhere. In this game, you get 120 optional puzzles, and then 4 main required puzzles that have 2 enemy types, Mechanical Guardian and Gooey Black Thing on the wall. I know Zelda games scream out, this game has puzzles, but we're talking about a whole new level here. If I had been told that Breath of the Wild was a game similar to The Witness, it'd be amazing, because that's a puzzle-centered game with a fantastic story. At least that's what I've been told. I haven't quite played the game yet. Instead, I was given a puzzle game with the shell of Zelda, and it just feels wrong. I like puzzle games, but I don't go to Zelda to play a shit ton of puzzles, if that makes any sense. But that's Breath of the Wild's open world, and it feels like there's just not a lot that I can take from. The next thing I have a problem with is its enemies. When it comes to enemies, there's like 5 of them with different variations. Would it have killed them to come up with more enemy types? Okay, so there's 11 different types of enemies, and each type has a variation. Meanwhile, Twilight Princess, a game that came out years ago, has over 60 unique enemies alone. It honestly makes no sense why there's so few enemies. Then there's the music, which, by the way, I love Zelda soundtracks. Who doesn't love a Zelda soundtrack? Skyward Sword, one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. Here's the thing though, Breath of the Wild's soundtrack is great on its own, but when it's put with the game, it feels like it's rarely there. And that's kind of sad. I like going to Kakariko Village and hearing its music. I like having each individual dungeon having an individual theme. I like the leitmotif scrawled throughout the entire franchise and the fact that musical items have been such an important part of the franchise. The Ocarina in Ocarina of Time, the Wolf Howl in Twilight Princess, the conducting in Wind Waker, the 8 musical instruments in Link's Awakening, and yet, in Breath of the Wild, the music just never plays a part in almost anything. And it's sad to me, especially when the opening of this game is so emotionally breathtaking with the music. I just wished it would have been implemented better. And finally, the story. Now, the story in Breath of the Wild is completely optional. You can finish the tutorial area, which by the way is the best designed part of this game. The tutorial is near perfect and it's what drew me in so much in my first few hours of playing. But after the tutorial, theoretically you can go straight into Ganon and fight him and beat the game. If you so choose, you can instead do the main story, which most people will, because trying to fight Ganon at the beginning is incredibly difficult. Trust me, I tried. It didn't go so well. The main story, it involves these events that lead up to the 4 divine beasts. These are also the events that feel forced without really leaving much of an impact on the player. At least, most of it didn't leave any kind of impact on me. I would argue that the only time I felt truly invested in the story was the first route that I took, which involved going to Zora's domain, meeting Sidon, one of the best characters in the game, and learning about Mipha, another one of the best characters in the game. After that, the story just didn't do anything for me. It's even hard to remember the other champions' names because Mipha was the only one that left any kind of impact on me. Meanwhile, my favorite Zelda game, Twilight Princess, is this overarching tale about Midna and how at the beginning of the game I didn't like her and at the end of the game I missed her. It was character development, it was character growth that was lost, there were stakes. In this game, yes, there was loss, there were 4 characters that died before this game started. Yes, you're trying to save Zelda, yes, you're trying to beat Ganon, but it's so cliched without any true character development. And that kind of sucked. It was unfortunate. It was kind of sad to not have a story that I really could cling on to. And that's Breath of the Wild in a nutshell. They created an open world with optional side quests that have nothing to do with the story, minimal amounts of enemies, a story that isn't even required, and a game that can literally be beaten in less than an hour if you can get good enough to beat the final boss. In my opinion, this was just a poor attempt at an open world game. Breath of the Wild is honestly just one single thing to me, a spectacle that can be cherished for a few hours, and that's all.